A police officer and his young son were walking through the snowy streets of Pasadena with their loyal German shepherd by their side when they saw her. A little girl in a torn pink dress, sitting on the cold pavement, clutching her mother's hand as both of them shivered in the winter air. The child's voice trembled. "It's my birthday, but we don't have a cake." And those words cut deeper than any storm. What happened next would test their courage, their compassion, and the invisible walls society builds between rich and poor. But what followed will restore your faith in kindness, family, and the quiet miracles God still works among us. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. And if you believe every child deserves warmth and love, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see the world. The first flakes of snow drifted down upon Chicago's Michigan Avenue, the wide boulevard gleaming with holiday lights that tried to push back the grayness of winter. It was late December, and the city breathed in the still, cold air of a true Midwestern morning. Cars crept along the icy street, their headlights shining against the white curtain that steadily fell from the sky. The sound of boots crunching on the frozen sidewalks mingled with the distant bells of the L train overhead. This was a day when most people hurried past with their collars turned up, desperate to reach the warmth of a coffee shop or the glow of their office buildings. But for one man, his son, and their loyal companion, the day was about to become unforgettable. Daniel Carter, 35 years old, was a man shaped by both discipline and loss. Standing at 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that filled out his Navy winter police jacket, Daniel's presence often drew attention before he ever spoke. His short brown hair was already touched with silver at the temples, a sign of stress more than age, and his hazel eyes carried both the watchfulness of a cop and the tenderness of a father. His jawline was strong, though softened by a scruffy beard he never seemed to keep perfectly trimmed. Years of patrolling Chicago's rougher neighborhoods had left Daniel with an alert posture, always scanning, always ready. But beneath the uniform and the training was a man who carried a quiet loneliness, one born the day his wife had walked out, leaving him with a 2-year-old son and questions that had never been answered. That abandonment had carved away part of Daniel's trust in others, but it had also deepened his resolve to be the anchor in his son's life. At his side trotted Ethan Carter, his 7-year-old boy, bundled in a thick gray winter coat, his cheeks already pink from the biting wind. Ethan was small for his age, with sandy blonde hair that refused to stay neat under his knit cap, and bright blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. He had inherited his father's quiet resilience, but inside him lived a heart that overflowed with compassion. Ethan had grown up without his mother, and though the absence left scars, it also gave him an unusual sensitivity toward others' pain. Teachers at school often remarked how Ethan was the first to comfort classmates who cried, the first to share his lunch if someone forgot theirs. That morning, he skipped slightly ahead on the icy pavement, careful but eager, pointing at the snowflakes as though each one was a miracle. And walking beside them, loyal as always, was Max, the 6-year-old German shepherd who had been Daniel's partner for years. Max was no ordinary pet. He had been trained as a K9, muscular and disciplined, with a thick black and tan coat that bristled against the cold. His amber eyes held a sharp intelligence that made strangers hesitate, but also a warmth that children seemed to sense instantly. Max had scars hidden beneath his fur from past work in law enforcement, moments of confrontation, dangerous arrests. But he had transitioned from active service to being Daniel's family guardian after sustaining an injury in the line of duty. Though fully healed, he now lived a quieter life, but one where his loyalty remained unshakable. For Ethan, Max was more than a dog. He was a brother, a protector, and often a silent listener to the boy's deepest thoughts. The trio walked their usual Saturday route through downtown Chicago, the falling snow swirling around them as Daniel held Ethan's mittened hand and occasionally tugged gently on Max's leash. It was their ritual to spend mornings together like this, away from Daniel's long shifts and the silence of their modest home. Ethan loved pointing out the Christmas displays in the shop windows, and Daniel loved seeing the sparkle of wonder in his son's eyes. Yet that morning, as they approached a row of boutiques glowing against the snow, Ethan suddenly slowed his steps. His smile faded, and his blue eyes fixed on something ahead with an expression of concern. There, Against the cold concrete wall of a shuttered electronics store sat a young woman and a little girl. The woman cradled the child in her lap, her arms wrapped tightly around her as if to shield her from the world. Snow had already begun to gather on their shoulders. The woman was Sofia Ramirez, 29 years old, her beauty dulled by exhaustion, but still undeniable. She had long, golden blonde hair that spilled in waves from beneath a threadbare scarf, strands glistening where snowflakes had caught. Her face was delicate yet drawn with worry, her dark brown eyes swollen from tears. Once, Sofia had been a hopeful young waitress with dreams of stability, but betrayal had hardened her outlook. The father of her child had vanished when she became pregnant, leaving her to fend for herself. She had worked until she couldn't keep her job, then bounced from shelter to shelter. That instability had etched both resilience and guardedness into her character. Sofia distrusted kindness. It often came with a hidden cost, but her love for her daughter was the one thing she never let falter. Clinging to her was Lily Ramirez, 5 years old, petite and fragile in a faded pink dress layered under a thin coat patched with mismatched fabric squares. Lily had the same golden hair as her mother, tousled and damp from melting snow, and her large brown eyes shimmered with both innocence and hunger. Despite the cold, she clutched a small threadbare stuffed rabbit, her only toy. Lily's nature was gentle, quiet, and unusually mature for her age. She rarely complained about their hardship, sensing how hard her mother struggled, but her longing for the simple joys other children had, warmth, friends, a birthday cake, often slipped through in her eyes. Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve, his voice trembling with urgency. "Daddy, they're crying. That little girl, she looks so sad." His breath formed clouds in the frozen air as he pleaded, his bright eyes already glistening with tears. "Can we help them?" "Please." Daniel froze, his hazel eyes taking in the scene. The father and the policeman inside him wrestled with each other. He knew how complicated it could be to step into strangers' troubles, but he also knew he couldn't harden his son's tender heart. For a moment, he said nothing, only tightening his grip on Ethan's shoulder. Then Max gave a low, mournful whine and stepped forward, his tail swishing slowly as he nudged toward Lily. The girl looked up, startled at first, but when Max sat before her, tilting his head and gently brushing his cold nose against her small hand, she let out a soft giggle through her tears. It was the first sound of joy she had made that day. Sofia's eyes widened in alarm, instinctively pulling her daughter closer, but then she saw the sincerity in Ethan's gaze and the calm strength in Daniel's stance. Something in her heart cracked, just a little. "We're fine," she whispered hoarsely, though her voice betrayed the lie. Daniel crouched down to meet her eyes, his breath puffing in the cold air. "Ma'am, it's freezing out here. Are you and your little girl okay? Do you need help?" Sofia shook her head quickly, walls rising again. "We don't need charity. We'll be fine." But her words were undercut by the tremor in her lips and the way Lily clung tighter, shivering in the wind. It was Ethan who stepped closer, fearless in the way only children can be. "My name's Ethan," he said gently, his mittened hand reaching out toward Lily. "This is Max. He likes you. And that's my daddy. What's your name?" Sofia hesitated, but Lily whispered softly, "I'm Lily." Ethan smiled warmly. "Hi, Lily. Today, is it your birthday?" He had caught the faint words earlier when Sofia had tried to comfort her child. Sofia's composure finally broke. Tears slid down her cheeks, freezing almost instantly in the winter air. "Yes, she's 5 today. She asked me for a cake, but I can't afford one." The confession hung in the icy air like a fragile truth, heavy and heartbreaking. Passers-by walked faster, pretending not to hear, their eyes averted as though ignoring the pain would erase it. But Ethan's face hardened with determination. He spun toward his father, gripping Daniel's hand with both of his small ones. "Daddy, it's her birthday. We can't let her have no cake. Please, Daddy, please, can we buy her one?" Daniel looked at his son, his earnest face, his pleading blue eyes, and the faithful dog beside him, and felt something stir deep within. In that moment, the cold of Chicago seemed to fade beneath the warmth of a child's compassion. He knew there was only one answer. "Of course we can, buddy," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Sofia blinked, startled. "No, you don't understand. We can't accept." But Ethan was already clapping his hands, his joy bursting through the snowy air. Max barked once, as if in agreement, his amber eyes bright. The decision had been made, and so, in the heart of a Chicago winter, beneath the falling snow and the indifferent gazes of the city, two families, one broken by abandonment, the other by hardship, took their first steps toward becoming something new. The snow had grown heavier by the time Daniel made his decision. Flakes whirled down from the gray sky in sheets, softening the outlines of the tall glass buildings that loomed over Michigan Avenue. Traffic hissed against the slush-covered streets, and the holiday window displays glowed faintly against the white curtain of winter. With Ethan's hand still tugging insistently at his sleeve and Max trotting beside them with a wag of his tail, Daniel guided Sophia and Lily down the street toward a small bakery that still had its lights on despite the early hour. The little group must have looked unusual. A uniformed police officer with his son, a large German shepherd padding loyally at his side, and a young mother and child walking hesitantly behind, their worn clothing stark against the luxury boutiques. Sophia's cheeks were red from the cold, her lips cracked, but her eyes carried a flicker of hope she had tried desperately to suppress. Lily clutched her ragged stuffed rabbit tighter and glanced up at the falling snow with wide eyes, as if the world itself had shifted just a little. The bakery was called Harper's Sweets, a small family-owned shop wedged between a jeweler and a coffee chain. The glass front was fogged with warmth, and the scent of sugar and butter drifted into the street each time the door opened. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Eleanor Harper, a woman in her late 50s with salt and pepper hair tied neatly into a bun. She was petite, with kind gray eyes behind rounded spectacles and hands that moved with the precision of decades of practice. Eleanor had run the shop with her late husband until his passing 5 years earlier, and though the grief had never fully left her, she found solace in baking and in greeting her regular customers with a smile that masked her loneliness. When the bell above the door chimed, Eleanor looked up from arranging a tray of frosted cupcakes. Her gaze first landed on Daniel, noting the badge gleaming on his coat, then on the shivering figures behind him. "Good morning, Officer Carter," she said warmly, recognizing him as a customer who often stopped in with his son. Her eyes softened when they rested on Sophia and Lily. "And who do we have here?" Before Daniel could answer, Ethan bounded forward, his excitement barely contained. "It's her birthday today," he announced proudly, pointing toward Lily. "She needs a cake." "The best cake. Can you help us?" Eleanor's face lit with understanding. She leaned over the counter to smile at Lily, who ducked shyly against her mother's side. "Well, every little girl deserves a cake on her birthday," Eleanor said gently. "Let's see what we can find, shall we?" Daniel felt something ease in his chest as the tension in Sophia's shoulders lessened. He watched as Lily allowed herself to be coaxed forward, her small boots squeaking on the tile floor. Max lay down obediently near the door, his amber eyes following every move with quiet vigilance. While Eleanor led Ethan and Lily toward a display of cakes, Daniel stepped aside with Sophia. She looked uncomfortable, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though bracing against more than just the cold. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured, "but please understand, I don't want to be anyone's burden." Daniel shook his head slowly. "You're not a burden. Not to me, not to Ethan. He wanted to do this. Sometimes we just need to let kindness happen." Sophia's eyes glistened, but she said nothing more, only turned to watch her daughter. Ethan and Lily returned moments later with Eleanor carrying a cake box. Inside was a small but beautifully decorated round cake, frosted with pale pink buttercream and adorned with delicate sugar roses. Lily's eyes widened as though she'd been shown a treasure chest. "Now," Eleanor said, "this one has been waiting for a very special birthday girl. I think it belongs to you." Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel touched her elbow lightly. "We'll take it," he said firmly. Eleanor wrapped the cake and added a small bag of paper plates, plastic forks, and even a handful of balloons she kept for children's parties. "On the house," she whispered to Daniel when Sophia wasn't listening. That little girl looked like she hadn't smiled in a long time. With their prize in hand, the group left the warm bakery and stepped back into the snow. Daniel suggested the park a few blocks away, one with benches and an old stone fountain now covered in frost. By the time they reached it, the snow had thickened into a soft blanket on the ground, crunching under their boots. They brushed off a wooden picnic table, and Daniel laid down his own coat as a makeshift tablecloth. Ethan eagerly arranged the balloons while Sophia held Lily close, her eyes shining as she watched strangers, now friends, create a celebration from nothing. Max circled the group, his nose twitching at the smell of sugar before lying down at Lily's feet like a sentinel. As Daniel lit 5 small candles Eleanor had tucked into the bag, the wind gusted, threatening to snuff them out. Without hesitation, Max rose and positioned himself in front of the table, his broad body shielding the flames. Ethan giggled, pointing. "Look, Lily, Max is guarding your candles." For the first time that day, Lily laughed, a sweet, bell-like sound that cut through the cold air. She leaned forward and closed her eyes tightly before blowing with all her might. The candles flickered, then died, leaving tiny wisps of smoke curling upward. Everyone clapped, and Lily's cheeks flushed with joy. Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. I don't remember the last time she looked this happy," she whispered. They cut the cake, passing slices on paper plates. Ethan insisted Max receive a small piece too, and the dog accepted it with dignified patience, tail thumping against the snow. Strangers passing through the park paused to smile at the unusual sight. A policeman, his boy, a homeless mother and child, and a loyal dog sharing a party in the snow. The celebration might have ended quietly there, but the city had other plans. A man stumbled toward them from the far end of the park, his movements unsteady. His coat was tattered, his face unshaven, and the stench of alcohol preceded him. His name was Rick Donnelly, a once promising construction worker in his 40s whose life had unraveled after an accident left him unable to keep steady employment. Alcohol had dulled his pain but sharpened his bitterness. Rick had grown used to harassing park visitors, lashing out at families that reminded him of what he had lost. "What's this?" he slurred, pointing a grimy finger at the little gathering. "Birthday party in the snow? Where's my invitation?" Sophia stiffened, pulling Lily close. Ethan clutched his father's sleeve, while Max rose instantly, ears pricked, body tense. His deep growl rumbled across the snowy park like distant thunder. Daniel stood, his posture calm but firm. "Sir, you need to move along," he said evenly. Rick sneered. "Oh, the cop with his pretty cake. Think you can boss me around?" He took a step closer but froze when Max bared his teeth and advanced a pace, the dog's hackles bristling. "Max," Daniel commanded softly, and the dog halted, still poised like a coiled spring. The message was clear: one wrong move and Rick would regret it. For a tense moment, the only sound was the whisper of falling snow. Then Rick spat into the ground and stumbled backward. "Fine. Keep your stupid cake." He staggered away, his figure swallowed by the winter haze. Sophia let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "If it weren't for your dog—" "Max's family," Ethan interrupted proudly, hugging the German shepherd's neck. "He protects us. He protects everyone we love." The words struck Daniel like a quiet truth. Family. Maybe, just maybe, this small circle gathered around a cake in the snow could become more than strangers. As the last crumbs were eaten and the balloons bobbed in the cold air, Daniel found himself watching Sophia and Lily laugh with Ethan, Max lying between them like a bridge. Snowflakes clung to the children's eyelashes, and for a moment the world seemed transformed. It had begun as a simple request from a little boy, but Daniel knew this was only the beginning. The snow did not let up that evening. By the time the small birthday gathering had ended, the park benches were already cloaked in white, and the fountain looked like a frozen sculpture carved from glass. The city around them had quieted. Most people hurried home, their breath visible in the icy wind, while traffic slowed to a cautious crawl across slick streets. Daniel glanced at Sophia and Lily and felt a familiar heaviness in his chest. Their smiles during the cake had been real, but already he could see the cold biting at them again, tugging away the warmth of the celebration. Sophia tried to brush snow from her daughter's coat, but the thin fabric was damp, clinging to Lily's small frame. The little girl shivered violently, her lips pale, though she stubbornly tried to hide it. Sophia's own scarf was soaked, and her hands, reddened from the cold, trembled as she pulled it tighter. Daniel couldn't ignore it. "You can't stay out here tonight," he said firmly, his voice carrying both command and concern. "It's too dangerous. The temperature's dropping." Sophia shook her head quickly. "We'll be fine. There's a shelter on the south side. They sometimes have room," but she didn't sound convinced. Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve, his blue eyes wide. "Dad, please. Let them come home with us. Just for tonight." His voice was soft but insistent, filled with the same determination Daniel had seen earlier when his son pleaded for a cake. Max gave a low bark, as though seconding the request. Daniel met Sophia's eyes. They were wary, shielded by years of hardship and disappointment, yet behind them lay exhaustion so deep it was almost unbearable. "Sophia," he said gently, lowering his tone, "I know what it's like to feel you have to do everything alone. But sometimes it's okay to accept help, just for one night. Let me give you both a warm place to sleep." Sophia's defenses faltered. Her daughter's small hand tugging at her coat was the final push. Lily whispered, "Please, Mama." "I want to stay with Ethan and Max." Sophia exhaled, defeated by love. "All right," she whispered. The group walked together through the snowy streets toward Daniel's home in a quieter neighborhood just outside downtown. It was a modest brick townhouse, old but well kept, with a small yard now buried beneath fresh snow. Christmas lights, still hanging from the eaves, twinkled faintly in the dusk. Daniel unlocked the door and ushered them inside, the rush of warm air from the heater enveloping them instantly. Ethan hurried to help, pulling off his hat and boots while Max shook himself, sending snowflakes scattering onto the entry rug. Sophia hesitated at the threshold, overwhelmed by the sight of a home, an actual home that smelled of cinnamon and pine from a candle burning on the table. She felt both grateful and painfully aware of her own lack. The living room was cozy, a worn brown sofa with a patchwork quilt draped over the back, shelves lined with books and framed photos of Ethan growing up, and in one corner, a dog bed where Max often curled. The walls bore the subtle imperfections of a house well lived in, not perfect, but real. Ethan eagerly showed Lily the toys in his room, a box of action figures, a small wooden train set, and shelves of picture books. Lily's eyes widened, her thin hands brushing over the toys as though they were priceless treasures. Ethan grinned. "You can play with anything. Max likes to play fetch inside too, but he always wins." While the children settled, Daniel led Sophia to the kitchen. The room was bright, its cabinets painted white, the counters neat but clearly used often. He busied himself making hot chocolate. Sophia sat at the table, feeling strangely out of place, yet comforted by the normalcy. It was then that the doorbell rang. Daniel frowned and went to answer it. Standing outside, brushing snow off her coat, was Mrs. Linda Green, a neighbor in her early 50s. She was tall, with streaks of silver running through her dark hair tied into a bun, and warm brown eyes set in a face lined not only by age but also by kindness. Linda was a retired schoolteacher who had lived next door for 20 years, often keeping an eye on Ethan when Daniel worked late shifts. She had a sturdy build, wore a thick cardigan and wool scarf, and carried the air of someone both practical and nurturing. "Evening, Daniel," she said with a smile. "I saw you bringing guests in through the snow. Everything all right?" Her tone held curiosity, but not judgment. Daniel nodded. "They're friends." Needed a place for the night. Linda's gaze softened when she saw Sophia and Lily through the doorway. She stepped inside, her boots squeaking. "Well, no child should be out in this weather." "Let me help." She set down a small basket she'd been carrying, homemade bread wrapped in cloth. "I baked too much again." "You can share it." Sophia murmured a quiet thank you, her voice thick. Linda gave her a reassuring smile. "You're safe here," she said simply, before turning to fuss over Ethan and Lily. Later that evening, after mugs of hot chocolate had warmed their hands and laughter from the children filled the house, Sophia found herself sitting on the sofa watching Ethan and Lily draw pictures together. Max lay between them, his head resting on his paws, occasionally nudging the crayons with his nose as if offering his own opinion. Daniel sat across from her, studying her with quiet intensity. "Sophia," he said finally, "you don't have to tell me everything. But if you want, I'm here to listen." She hesitated, staring at the flicker of the candle. Then, slowly, the words came. She told him about working double shifts as a waitress, about the nights spent worrying whether she could afford food, and about the man who had walked out before Lily was even born. Each memory weighed heavy, but she shared them anyway, perhaps because for the first time in years, someone truly seemed to care. Daniel didn't interrupt. He only nodded, his hazel eyes steady, his presence a quiet anchor. When she finished, there was no pity in his expression, only respect. "You've been stronger than most people I know," he said. Sophia felt her throat tighten. It had been so long since anyone had acknowledged her strength instead of her struggle. The evening wound down. Linda excused herself, promising to check in the next day. Ethan and Lily, exhausted, fell asleep on the rug with Max curled protectively between them. Daniel carried his son to bed, then carefully lifted Lily to the guest room, covering her with a warm quilt. Sophia followed, pausing at the doorway to watch her daughter's peaceful face. The tension finally eased. When she returned to the living room, Daniel offered her the sofa. "It's not much, but it's warm," he said. Sophia nodded, too tired to argue. As she lay down, the quilt tucked around her, she glanced once more at Daniel. "Thank you," she whispered. Snow continued to fall outside, muffling the city's noise, wrapping the world in silence. For the first time in months, perhaps years, Sophia allowed herself to believe tomorrow might bring something better. Morning light filtered through the frosted windows, soft and golden against the backdrop of a white blanketed city. Pasadena, usually bustling with bright skies, seemed quieter after the storm, its streets muffled under snow that stubbornly refused to melt. Inside Daniel's townhouse, warmth radiated from the old heater, filling the air with the scent of cinnamon toast and coffee. For Sophia, waking in such comfort after months of restless nights was almost disorienting. She stirred on the sofa, blinking at the sight of Lily curled up in the guest room doorway, her daughter peeking out with sleepy eyes that carried something she hadn't seen in far too long peace. Daniel was already up, dressed in his dark police winter uniform, a thick navy jacket zipped to the collar. His tall frame, broad shoulders, and hazel eyes gave him an imposing presence, though softened by the kindness in his voice as he poured hot cocoa for the children. Ethan sat at the breakfast table, his blonde hair sticking up in wild tufts, laughing as Max rested his big head in the boy's lap, begging for scraps of toast. Sophia slipped into the kitchen, self-conscious in the oversized sweater Linda had lent her the night before. The neighbor had stopped by again early this morning with warm clothes from her attic, an old pea coat for Sophia, mittens for Lily, and a knitted hat that Ethan insisted she wear immediately. Linda's quiet generosity filled Sophia with both gratitude and unease. She was not used to such kindness without strings attached. As they ate breakfast together, Daniel cleared his throat. "Sophia, I've been thinking. You need more than a warm bed. You need stability. My precinct has an administrative assistant position open. Nothing glamorous, but it's steady work with benefits. If you'd like, I could put in a word." Sophia froze, her spoon halfway to her lips. The thought of working at a police station surrounded by authority, under watchful eyes, made her uneasy, but then she glanced at Lily, who was giggling at Ethan's joke, her cheeks flushed with joy. She couldn't afford to let fear dictate her choices. I don't want to be a burden," she murmured. Daniel shook his head firmly. "You're not a burden. You've held your family together through things most people wouldn't survive. Let me help you find your feet." Before Sophia could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Linda wasn't expected, so Daniel opened it cautiously. On the porch stood Sergeant Mark Davies, Daniel's superior. He was a man in his late 40s, with a stocky build and thinning blonde hair. His cheeks were ruddy from the cold, and his sharp blue eyes missed nothing. His reputation was one of toughness, gruff with younger officers, yet respected for his decades of service. Years on the force had made him wary, suspicious of strangers, and Daniel knew that side of him all too well. "Morning, Carter," Davies greeted, his voice gravelly. His eyes swept past Daniel, landing on Sophia in the kitchen, his brows furrowed. "Didn't expect to see guests in your home." Daniel kept his tone even. "This is Sophia and her daughter Lily. They needed shelter during the storm. It's temporary." Davies stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. He studied Sophia openly, his gaze heavy with unspoken judgment. "You know the department's rules about appearances, Carter. A cop bringing in strangers, especially when there's a child involved, it could raise questions." Sophia's face burned. She dropped her eyes, feeling once again like an intruder. But before shame could swallow her, Daniel's voice cut through, calm but steady. "They're under my protection. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me." Davies grunted, clearly unconvinced, but said nothing further. Instead, he turned his attention to Max, who had risen from his spot by the table. The German shepherd stood tall and alert, his amber eyes fixed on the sergeant. Max had sensed the tension immediately, his stance protective, ears pricked forward. "Good-looking dog," Davies muttered, softening slightly. "Reminds me of the K9s we used to run with. Loyal creatures. Sometimes I trust them more than people." He gave Daniel a meaningful look before leaving with a curt nod. The moment the door closed, Sophia exhaled shakily. "I don't want to cause trouble for you," she whispered. Daniel shook his head again. "You didn't. Davies has always been like that, suspicious of anything outside the line. But don't let him scare you. He'll see soon enough that you and Lily belong here. That afternoon, Daniel drove Sophia to the precinct to meet Officer Sarah Jennings, the civilian coordinator who oversaw non-sworn staff. Sarah was in her mid-30s, tall and lean, with jet black hair tied into a tight braid. Her sharp blue eyes and no-nonsense demeanor reflected a life shaped by discipline. Years earlier, she had been forced to leave her dream of becoming a detective after a car accident left her with chronic knee pain. Despite the setback, she carried herself with quiet strength, respected among her peers for her fairness and efficiency. Sarah greeted Sophia politely, her expression measured. "Daniel tells me you're interested in the admin position. It's mostly paperwork, scheduling, and filing. The pay's not bad, and it comes with health insurance." Sophia clasped her hands nervously. I'd be grateful for the chance." Sarah studied her for a long moment, then softened slightly. "We'll need to run background checks, but I'll be honest, you look like someone who knows how to fight through hard days. That kind of resilience counts more than a polished resume here." The words sent a small surge of hope through Sophia. For once, someone had seen beyond her poverty and recognized her strength. Back at the townhouse, Ethan and Lily had built a fort out of blankets in the living room, giggling as Max crawled halfway inside before collapsing with a groan, making them laugh harder. Linda stopped by again, this time with a basket of apples and a knowing smile. She fussed over the children, then leaned closer to Sophia while Daniel was in the other room. "You've found a good man in Daniel," she whispered. "Don't let fear push you back into the cold." That night, after the children were asleep, Sophia sat with Daniel by the window. Snow still fell lightly, dusting the quiet street. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing all this?" "You barely know me." Daniel's hazel eyes softened. "Because Ethan taught me something yesterday. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. And because I believe you and Lily deserve a chance to feel safe again." Sophia felt tears sting her eyes. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe those words. Outside, Max raised his head at the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the snow, his ears swiveling. He gave a quiet growl, not of alarm, but warning. Daniel noticed and moved to the window, scanning the dark street. Nothing but shadows. Yet in that moment, he knew this fragile piece they had built could be tested at any time. Still, as Sophia rested her head against the sofa cushion, watching Lily sleep soundly in the guest room, she allowed herself one fragile, precious thing: hope. The next few days brought a fragile rhythm to Daniel's townhouse. Sophia helped with meals, eager to repay kindness in small ways, while Lily and Ethan became inseparable, filling the house with laughter that warmed even the coldest winter mornings. Max patrolled like a guardian, often lying between the children during their games, his thick fur a shield of comfort. For the first time in months, Sophia allowed herself to dream beyond mere survival. But reality had a way of intruding. On Thursday afternoon, as Sophia waited in the precinct lobby for Sarah Jennings to finalize her paperwork, the glass doors swung open, letting in a blast of frigid air and 3 strangers who would shatter her brief peace. At the front was Betty Collins, a woman in her late 40s with a tall frame and an angular face etched with years of bitterness. Her dyed black hair was styled into a harsh bob, and her bright red coat seemed almost garish against the dull gray of the lobby. Her eyes, bloodshot from alcohol and sleepless nights, darted sharply around the room until they landed on Sophia. Behind her trailed 2 men. Tommy Hales, a burly man in his 20s with a crooked nose and narrow eyes, dressed in a worn leather jacket, and Leo Vargas, thin and twitchy, his hoodie stained and his shoes falling apart. They looked like shadows dragged in from a darker world, and together they carried the air of confrontation. Betty's voice rang through the lobby, drawing every eye. "There she is, the thief who ran off with my daughter and my grandchild." Sophia stiffened, her hands trembling as heat rushed to her cheeks. She hadn't seen Betty in years, not since she'd left her mother's house during pregnancy. Betty had always been cruel, bitter from her failed marriage and lost youth, channeling her resentment onto Sophia. It was Betty who had told her she was worthless, that Lily's father had been right to leave. Daniel appeared within moments, drawn by the commotion. His presence was commanding in uniform, his hazel eyes narrowing as he stepped between Sophia and Betty. "What's going on here?" Betty sneered, her red lips curling. "What's going on is you've got a criminal hiding in your house." "That's my daughter, officer." and she kidnapped my grandchild from me. I want her arrested, Sophia gasped. That's not true! You never wanted us, Betty. You told me to leave when I was pregnant. You said I'd ruined your life. But Betty only raised her voice. You abandoned your family, stole the child, and now you're living off this cop's charity. It's disgusting. Her words sliced through the room, turning heads, planting seeds of doubt. Sarah Jennings stepped forward, her posture tall and commanding despite the old injury that gave her a faint limp. She addressed Betty in a calm, icy tone. This precinct isn't the place for personal feuds. If you want to file a claim, you'll need documentation. Do you have custody papers? Proof of guardianship? Betty faltered, her bravado flickering, but Tommy barked, She doesn't need papers. Blood's blood. Daniel squared his shoulders, his voice low but firm. Sophia is Lily's legal guardian. Unless you can prove otherwise, this ends now. Betty's eyes gleamed with venom. You think you can stop me? I'll get the courts involved. You'll see. No little tramp is stealing my blood. With that, she turned sharply, dragging her companions with her. But before exiting, Leo paused just long enough to whisper to Sophia, You'll regret crossing her. The threat sent a chill through Sophia that no heater could chase away. Later that evening, back at the townhouse, Sophia sat at the table, her head in her hands while Daniel prepared dinner. Linda Green had come over as well, bringing a casserole and her steady presence. She sat beside Sophia, rubbing her shoulder. Don't let her poison you, dear. Some people thrive on misery, and Betty's one of them. But she can make good on her threat, Sophia whispered. If she goes to court, if she lies, I don't have money for lawyers. What if they take Lily from me? Her voice cracked. Daniel placed a hand on hers, warm and steady. You're not alone anymore. I won't let that happen. Max growled softly from his spot near the door, ears pricked toward the snowy street. It was as though even he sensed danger circling closer. To distract the children from the tension, Linda suggested they bake cookies. Ethan and Lily eagerly agreed, covering the kitchen in flour and laughter. Watching them, Sophia felt a fragile peace return, though her heart still ached with fear. Later, after the children were asleep, Daniel brought out a folder. I called a friend, he explained, an attorney who sometimes works with our department. Her name's Judge Rebecca Halpern. She's retired now but consults on family cases. If Betty tries to push this, we'll be ready. Rebecca Halpern arrived the next afternoon. She was 58, dignified with silver hair pulled back neatly, her black coat and leather gloves giving her an air of authority even out of the courtroom. Her eyes were sharp but kind, carrying the wisdom of decades in law. She sat with Sophia in the living room, listening carefully as the young woman poured out her fears. Rebecca nodded, then spoke in a steady tone. Family courts don't take kindly to relatives who suddenly show up after years of absence. Unless Betty can prove you're unfit, she doesn't have a case. Still, it will be stressful, and people like her thrive on intimidation. But you've got support now. Use it. Sophia blinked back tears, overwhelmed by gratitude. For the first time, she saw a path forward not built on fear, but on possibility. That evening, as the snow outside turned to icy rain, Sophia stood by the window watching Lily and Ethan play with Max. Daniel joined her, his hand brushing hers. You don't have to fight this alone, he said quietly. Whatever comes, we face it together. Sophia turned to him, her voice barely audible. I've never had anyone say that to me before. The storm outside raged, tapping against the glass, but inside the house there was warmth, light, and the fragile beginnings of something that looked very much like family. In the end, this story reminds us that miracles often arrive in the quietest ways. Sometimes they are not grand displays of power, but a warm home opened to strangers, a child's innocent request for kindness, or the courage to start again after years of hardship. For those who believe, these are not accidents but the gentle hand of God working through ordinary people to bring extraordinary change. Just as Sophia found shelter and hope, we are reminded that in our daily lives we too can be the answer to someone's prayer. A smile to a neighbor, a hand extended to a struggling parent, or a simple act of compassion may be the very miracle God uses to change a life. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with others. Leave a comment about what it meant to you, and subscribe so you never miss the next story of faith, love, and redemption. let us also take a moment to pray together. May God bless everyone watching this video, protect your families, and guide your steps through every storm. If you believe in the power of His miracles, write Amen in the comments as a sign of faith and unity.